I was debilitated by my fear. I was afraid of living. I had an existential fear. I had this huge ambition to do things in the world and to live a great life and to really fulfill my potential, but I was afraid. I was afraid all the time. And even if there were moments when I kind of appeared to be brave, the background noise was always fear. I was so afraid of the world. I was so afraid mostly of my potential. I knew I could see my potential, but I was afraid of it. So I decided really early on, I remember thinking to myself one day, when I find the answers, I'm going to tell people, and I'm going to tell people the truth. I sat down, I reached breaking point, and I drew a pyramid on a piece of paper, and I wrote all my fears down, one fear on each step, and I decided that I was going to confront everything I was afraid of, one at a time, and get desensitization until I got no fears at all. At the bottom of my pyramid was a fear of spiders, and the fear was enough that if there was a spider in the corner of the room, I wouldn't go to bed. And the top fear was a fear of violent confrontation. Even though I was already a black belt in karate, I was still afraid of confrontation. I could have a fight in the dojo, I was okay, but the pre-fight and the post-fight, I just couldn't cope with. It was that drip effect of fear was, I didn't understand it and I couldn't cope with it. So I wrote down this pyramid of fears, and I ended up at the very top fear, at my fear of violence. I became a nightclub doorman to overcome my fear of violent confrontation. And of course got on the door and realised that once I looked closely and did a bit of internal inquiry, I realised that everybody was afraid. Some people just hid it better than others. But I also realised that you could become desensitised to fear. You could learn to handle that caustic emotion. You could learn to drive that caustic emotion. You could create from that emotion as long as you could contain it. So standing on a nightclub door taught me how to control fear, taught me how to channel fear, taught me how to make a better shape of fear. So I started to look at all the areas in my life where I felt afraid. I started to look to the history of the species, and of course I realised that there was nobody that wasn't afraid. You look at Christ in the Garden of Gethsemane, and he was afraid. He was so afraid, he said to God, "Take this cup from me." This is before the crucifixion. And then you look at Muhammad on the mountain in Saudi Arabia, just outside Mecca, when he had the revelations from the Archangel Gabriel. Muhammad, this great warrior, this entrepreneur, this beautiful man, became afraid. If Christ can be afraid, if Muhammad can be afraid, if Krishna can be afraid, if my prophets can be afraid, if my heroes can be afraid, it's okay for me to be afraid. The difference with these people was that Christ went through with the crucifixion. He put himself in front of his suffering. Muhammad took on the mantle of prophet. He stood in front of his suffering. And he grew and expanded. Arjuna went into the battle with Krishna on his chariot, consciousness behind him, and he won back his kingdom. Your kingdom lies behind this sea of nescience. Your kingdom lies behind this line of fear. Do your duty. This is your dharma. This is what you were meant to do. You have 100 billion cells in your body, and each of those cells is led by perception. And if you allow yourself to feel afraid, or if you allow yourself to fall into the oblivion of fear, you give 100 billion cells, and all of these cells are like individual, like microcosms of us. They're identical microcosms of everything that's in us. If we allow ourselves to become victim of fear and run away, we give 100 billion cells permission to be filled with fear. Fall into the fear, immerse yourself, surrender into it, become it, drive it, use it like a fuel. You are not on your own. You're not the first person in the world to feel afraid. You're not the last person to feel afraid. What the champions do is they surrender to that fear. They immerse themselves in that fear. They become one with that fear, and they drive it like it's a fuel. We have to surrender to a greater will. We have to intercourse with our fear.